Pictures only tell part of the story, and the story that pictures like this tell is that of a happy family. But behind closed doors, that wasn't the case. Now, a beloved mom of 4 is dead.
35 disturbance with a gun. Father with gun versus family.
She reportedly tried to get help on Christmas, but that final step, that cry for help, wasn't answered. She ended up shot dead. We're on the case presented by Law & Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. The woman at the center of this story that we're talking about today is being remembered as a devoted mom who put her children first. And here she is. Her name is Jeri Mains. She lived in a quiet part of Indianapolis, Indiana. She had accomplished a lot in her life. Most importantly, she raised 4 kids. Their ages 19, 17, 14, and 10. 2 boys and 2 girls. This is Jeri's last post on Facebook from December 26th. It's of her kids celebrating one of their graduations. Now here's a picture of Jeri with their 2 daughters on vacation, and there she is with her husband, Cecil. Now it appears that when Jeri posted the picture of her kids on the 26th, she was in the midst of trying to escape a marriage that had become allegedly violent. A protective order that Jeri had filed on Christmas Day details some scary allegations about what life was like inside her home, not just for her, but for their kids. Now, we talked to the county clerk in Indiana, but they would not give us that protective order that she filed, saying it's confidential. However, the Indy Star newspaper did get access to that document. Now, the Indy Star reports that Jeri filed the protective order at 10:28 Christmas morning, December 25th. Now, you think of that day being a time that a family, especially a family of 6, should be together, opening presents, having some coffee, but instead, she was trying to file a protective order. She said on Christmas Eve, her husband threw tongs at her, which cut her and bruised her. This wasn't, though, the first time where there had allegedly been public conflict in this marriage. The day before that, December 24th, the Star says that Cecil threatened to kill Jeri and himself when they were in the parking lot of the courthouse. Now, Jeri had reportedly told Cecil that she wanted a divorce. She also reportedly said that Cecil threatened to take his life in front of her and their kids earlier on. Now, the throwing of the tongs, Christmas Eve, that appears to have been the final straw for Jeri. The Star says that on December 10th, Cecil also punched Jeri's computer and knocked hot chocolate on her. Then, in November, he allegedly punched her in the face. He also, earlier in the year, allegedly broke the glass window of her truck because he punched it, the Star claims. But for as much as there were moments of rage, the petition says that Jeri claimed that Cecil said he was going to kill her, their 4 kids, and their pets multiple times going back years. So this was not something just for this year or this holiday season. This was an issue that she had claimed went on for a long time. Now, this was a man reportedly unhinged and unafraid to make his alleged intentions known, according to these court records.
35 disturbance with a gun. Father with gun versus family.
This is police dispatch recordings from December 28th, 3 days after Jeri had reportedly filed for protection from her husband. Now, there is a chilling detail about that request that I'll tell you about here in just a moment. Now, the first call to law enforcement came in around 2:20 in the afternoon on December 28th.
I have an uninvolved party calling, stating they heard a shot, believe someone could be shot. Additional caller states dad shot mom twice, leaving in a gray Toyota Tundra.
Now, we have the police report that says when officers got to the Mains home, they found Jeri shot on the driveway, and she was rushed to a hospital where this mom of 4 was pronounced dead. Her husband took off in a truck. Now, what happened leading up to Jeri's death, according to police, it is just terrifying. Now, one of the witnesses to her mom's murder was the Mains' 10-year-old daughter. This is what the police report has from her account. Quote, the juvenile stated that she was in the residence when her father came into the residence while her mother was not home and took a gun out of the safe. When her mother arrived, she began arguing with her father. Juvenile 1 saw her father point the gun towards her mother. Juvenile 1 called 911. She heard the shots and then saw her mom lying in the driveway. This girl's just 10 years old. Now, the Main's 14-year-old daughter told police that she was in her room when she heard her mom screaming. Then she came out of her room and saw her dad with a gun, and she heard a gunshot. She then heard another gunshot outside. She told police that her dad allegedly threatened to kill them in the past. Then you have the Main's 16-year-old son. He was also home. He said that he saw his dad come home, get a gun. He says that his parents were arguing, and his dad pulled out the gun. He said that his older brother tried to stop the fight. The 16-year-old boy ran upstairs and he called 911. The Main's 19-year-old son, he told police that Cecil was allegedly threatening Jeri with a gun inside the home. Then he followed her outside the house and then shot her in the driveway of this quiet neighborhood in broad daylight. Now, after he shot her, he allegedly drove away in his truck, leaving their son to try and save his mom, who had been shot in their driveway. Cecil Mains was arrested the following day. He made his first court appearance on January 5th, and he is now being held without bond. Now, as far as the protective order that his wife had filed reportedly on Christmas, a judge never saw it until it was too late. The Indiana Star says that once a petition is filed, it goes to a clerk who then assigns a case number and then sends it to a judge. The court was closed for the holidays from December 24th through the 28th. So instead of seeing the petition on the 26th, the earliest the judge could actually have signed off on it was December 29th. That's a day after Jeri was shot dead. When Cecil Mains was arrested, he had Jeri's phone in his truck, along with her credit cards, allegedly. Now, he didn't speak to officers and he requested a lawyer. When I looked up Cecil Mains' criminal record, I could only find some previous traffic infractions from 2011, 2009, 2008, and 2005. This appears to be the first time that he has ever faced charges like this for crimes like this, allegedly murdering his wife in broad daylight, the mother of his 4 children, in front of his 4 children, then leaving them without their mom. Joining us now to talk more about this case is criminal defense attorney and former assistant district attorney Anthony Asso. Thank you, as always, for being with us on Law and Crime. The detail that's in the Indy Star story about Jeri Mains filing a protective order on Christmas, but then a judge can't sign off on it until the next business day, and that's not for 4 days because of the holiday, and she ends up dying a day before business opens the next day. Like, what do you just make of, because I think it's, we look at that and it's just like, here's the system failing somebody.
Right.
What do you make of that timeline in this story?
Well, I think that the lack of government resources that present itself in this case are kind of a direct, I wouldn't say a direct cause to the murder, but you're right. It shows a lapse in the justice system and the civil judicial system that possibly could have prevented this from happening. Albeit, if Cecil Mains is going to do what Cecil Mains is going to do, I don't think a piece of paper probably is going to stop.
Yeah, and that's the other part of this, because there's just all these stories, whether it's coming out from the kids, from what Jeri Mains had allegedly written in this protective order about just the terror, it seems, that Cecil Mains was causing inside of this home. Back kind of to the point, though, with just like business hours and all of that. I mean, is that a jurisdiction thing? Like, is there in places like maybe where you practice in Texas where there's a judge working on Christmas or the day after Christmas? So if you do have someone who comes in with a situation as serious as Jeri Mains apparently had, that someone can sign off on that and still get it going even though the courthouse isn't open?
Yeah, to answer your question, it is jurisdictional, Chris. I think when we look at the criminal justice system, you're going to have in larger cities like Houston, Chicago, New York, LA, rolling magistrates, right, where they're able to process cases as they come in and issue magistrates' orders of emergency protection or bond conditions that prevent defendants from having contact with potential victims and complainants in cases. That's not typically the case in civil suits, right? Before the filing of this protective order, I don't think we have any reason to believe that there were prior cases against Cecil Mains. And so I don't know that the court would have viewed that, or the civil court would have viewed it as sort of such a time is of the essence type issue. So I think in criminal, yes, you do have rolling magistrates and they get to it pretty quickly. In civil, that's not necessarily the case. And you oftentimes will have to wait until business hours to get a protective order like this filed and signed.
Because also, I mean, you have this protective order that Jeri Mains, had written, and the Indy Star is the only outlet that's actually seen it. But it just details, threats, alleged attacks inside the home, but then like he doesn't have a criminal record really. I mean, there's some like traffic violations there, but it's not like this is someone who it appears had been, charged with assault in the past or getting into
Mhm.
other sort of like he's not in the eyes of the law like this hardened criminal up until all of this happens. Like how common in these cases is it that you can have kind of the reality inside the home, which is just an absolute monster, is what he seems to be. But then, you go in front of a judge, I could see an attorney saying, like, this is a guy who's been a model citizen. Where's the proof that there's anything more than a traffic ticket?
Well, it's an all too common narrative, Chris, right? Because you got to think about the barriers to, we call them barriers to disclosure in a case like this in family violence. The complainant in a family violence case typically has a long ongoing relationship with the defendant. In addition to physical abuse, there's oftentimes psychological abuse. They're financially dependent on the defendant. They have children with the defendant. So there's all these things that they realize that once they go to law enforcement to tell on or complain or report all the abuse that they've received, that there's a lot of consequences that come with that. And because of that, it prevents survivors and victims of domestic violence and abuse from reporting to law enforcement. So it's a very common narrative that we see all the time. And unfortunately, in a few instances, it can become fatal.
And had she gotten this protective order, and I know that, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of cases, like I've done episodes on cases where the person had a protective order, but it's just a piece of paper, and it's to say that if she had gotten this protective order, like what would that have meant for, I guess, her safety and the kids' safety from, in all of this, of course, is alleged at this point from Cecil Mains.
Well, it would have meant that if Cecil Mains had violated that protective order in any way, that he could be subject to further criminal prosecutions. But like I stated earlier, Chris, a piece of paper is not going to stop someone who's made their mind up. And one of the common themes that we see in homicidal domestic abuse situations is that the most dangerous time for the woman in a relationship, or even man in a relationship, is when that person decides ultimately that they want to leave. And so here we've got potential divorce going on. We have a filing of a protective order. And I think that's where Jeri really drew her line in the sand with Cecil and said, I'm done with this and I no longer want to be a part of this relationship. That's a very dangerous time for a woman.
And I think too, looking at now what Cecil Mains, what his defense could be, there's been times you're able to explain it better than I, but like a heat of passion defense, I'm sure in some sort of domestic cases is something a
Right.
defense attorney might go with. But when you look at least through the police report, the kid's talking about how he came home, you have this incident apparently a couple days prior in the parking lot of the courthouse where he's threatening to kill her, she said. Then he comes home early from work to get a gun, then an argument starts. How based on that, it seems like that would not qualify for this type of defense. I mean, how could you defend Cecil Mains based on everything that's been laid out?
Based on the way that everything's been laid out, it's hard to say at this point because you've got the 17-year-old that witnesses him going and getting the gun. You've got other children inside the house that witness that they hear arguing. And then you have, excuse me, I said the 17-year-old, I mean the 19-year-old who
Yeah.
ultimately sees Cecil follow her outside and shoot her. So that kind of precludes you from arguing self-defense. You really, my viewpoint on it is the defense has a lot of work in this case. I think that they need to talk to witnesses that had knowledge of the relationship between Jeri and Cecil, exclusive of the children, right? Because they probably have a different viewpoint that's not going to benefit the defense. They need to go through the complainant's phone in this case. They need to go through Cecil's phone in this case. They need to probably have Cecil go to some sort of psychiatrist to have him evaluated to see if there were any mental illnesses that were going on at the time. Might not amount to an insanity defense, but there might be something there that's mitigating that they can use in an effort to sort of negotiate or come to plea bargains with the prosecution in this case. So it's hard to say at this point what the defense will be. And it sounds like the defense is going to have their work cut out for them in this case.
When it comes to a heat of passion defense, what typically qualifies as that in cases like this between spouses?
I think that the public's general, like, I think that the common perception of what heat of passion is if I if someone comes home and finds their wife or their spouse in bed with another person. I think that that's what the general public perceives as heat of passion. However, it's not limited, it's not exclusive, it's not that exclusively, right? I think heat of passions are really, it's a stretch to get there, and you have to have the perfect fact set for it. And so I think we throw that language out like it will apply, and I can't say that it will. That's why looking at their text messages, that's why looking at witnesses that had a viewpoint of how the relationship was independent of the children are going to be extremely important in a case like this, because the investigation in this case was pretty short, right? And I think a lot of the investigation is going to take place after these charges are actually filed.
I think of, I mean, one of the real heartbreaking, and there's a lot of heartbreaking,
Mhm.
allegations in
Yeah, this is
the
gut
police
wrenching.
report. It's tough, and you think of the son that tried to break it up, the oldest in the house, I believe he's
Right.
19, goes out of the house, and then his dad, who had just shot his mom multiple times, he takes her phone, her credit card allegedly, and then he speeds off. And then you leave this teenager with his mom who she ends up going to the hospital. She was trying to save her life in the driveway. When you have as emotional a piece of the story like that, like how do you bring that into, if this were to go to trial and you're a prosecutor, like how do you tell that part of the story within the overall story of trying to get this man convicted?
You do it to the 19-year-old son. I mean, the way that if this case has to go to trial, the 19-year-old will take the stand if they can handle it. And as a prosecutor, part of your job is mentally and emotionally preparing for someone that's gone through that level of trauma to take the stand and do what's right by their family. Um, I can't imagine what it's like to be in that boy's shoes. I really can't. I recognize how difficult it can be just having worked these cases, but the woodshedding, which is what we call when we prepare witnesses to testify, that'll have to take place before he takes the stand will be immense. And I'm sure he himself is going to have to go through a lot of therapy to deal with the trauma that he's dealt with. But I think you tell it to the 19-year-old's lens. I mean, he'd probably be an early witness in this case.
And the youngest, just 10 years old, in the house as well. I mean, it's such a sad story. When it comes to the background of this marriage, and again, like Cecil Mains had never been to, at least from what I can see, never arrested for assault, never arrested, all of these incidents.
Mhm.
Like from a defense point of view, is there a way where you're going to have to find a way to explain out what happened in that driveway and everything
Right.
that took place in the home, but is there a way almost to exclude all the allegations in what is an incredibly damning protective order according to the Indy Star, that I'm sure from a prosecutor's standpoint, that paints a picture of just how toxic this marriage was?
It's tough, and it really depends on what state you're trying the case in. So a lot of jurisdictions account for nature of the relationship evidence and have deemed that that's admissible to come in during a trial, right? So when we talk about homicide and a family violence relationship, the state can have witnesses roll in to talk about a repeated history of behavior. And it's that's the type of evidence that's typically precluded, right? Because it's called unlawful character evidence. You can't say because someone robbed a bank on January 23rd that they robbed a bank on March 24th. But when it comes to homicide, there's a carve out that allows for nature of the relationship evidence. So it's really difficult for the defense to keep out prior instances of violence by a defendant against a complainant. So in this case, for Cecil against Jerry.
And Indiana is a death penalty state, and it doesn't appear that he was charged with capital
Mhm.
murder at this point. I get typically, and I know you're in Texas, which is
Sure.
also, of course, a death penalty state. Like, what would elevate this to that level? Because it's just horrific what he's accused of doing, and then especially, after committing it, he leaves her there in the
Mhm.
driveway for his son to try and keep her alive. And then he's taken the cell phone, he's taken the credit
Mhm.
card, according to police, and he's out the door driving down the street. When it comes to a death penalty case, typically, and I know it differs by state, like
Right.
what is the bar that a murder has to meet to qualify for that?
That's a good question, Chris, because I think when you see a fact set as egregious as we have here, the general public's thinking, well, how is this not capital murder? How is he not going to get life in prison? But there are certain elements that have to be met in order to elevate a charge. For instance, you have to be in the commission of certain felony offenses when you commit the murder. So let's say that the protective order had gone into place and Cecil had been ordered to leave the home and not have contact with Jeri. Well, if Cecil breaks into that house and kills Jeri, then that would raise the charge from first-degree murder up to capital murder. If you kill somebody that's in a certain age range, for instance, if you kill a child or you kill an elderly person, if you kill a police officer in the line of duty, these are things that can elevate a charge from first-degree murder to capital murder. Here, I think that the state probably recognizes, yes, he took the phone, but he probably wasn't murdering her to commit theft. I think that was just sort of part of his getaway at that point. And the murder statute in Indiana has a really high sentencing range. I think it's around 45 to 65 years, which in effect is a life sentence. So it's the safe charge, and I think it's a charge they probably feel comfortable presenting at trial.
And he is being held without bond. No, he has another court appearance that's upcoming. We'll see what happens next. Just you think of these kids, and what, certainly what Jeri went through, but then also what these kids will go through, living without both their mom and dad. Anthony Asso, thank you as always, criminal defense attorney, former assistant DA. Thank you as always for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
A GoFundMe is raising money for the kids of Jeri Mains. They are now, of course, without their mom. The money will go to living expenses, counseling and mental health care, legal and funeral expenses, as well as the long-term stability and living in their new reality of being without their mom. Cecil Mains is due next in court on February 10th. He is being held without bond. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.